Ambassador Valkyrie of the Scythian Collective stood in the great hall of the Galactic Concord and watched the newest species take their place among the stars. The humans had arrived only 30 years ago, bursting out of their small corner of the galaxy with eager eyes and hungry minds. And now they stood before the assembly as full members of galactic civilization. Valkyrie studied them with the cold, analytical gaze her species was known for, and she found them unremarkable in almost every way imaginable. They were soft creatures with fragile bodies and short lifespans, lacking the natural armor of the Kethri or the telepathic abilities of her own people. And yet, they smiled as if they belonged here among the elder races of the galaxy. The reception hall buzzed with conversation as diplomats from 100 worlds mingled and exchanged pleasantries, and Valkyrie found herself drawn toward the human delegation out of simple curiosity. Their ambassador was a man named Captain Marcus Cole, a former military officer who had traded his uniform for diplomatic robes, and he greeted her with a warm smile that seemed genuine despite the formal setting. "Ambassador Valkyrie," he said with a slight bow, "I have heard much about the Scythian Collective and your reputation for wisdom and fairness." "And I have heard little about humanity," she replied, her tone carrying no insult but simple honesty, "which is why I wish to speak with you directly." Cole laughed softly and gestured for her to walk with him toward a viewing window that overlooked the station's docking ring, where ships from dozens of species floated in peaceful formation. "What would you like to know?" he asked, and Valkyrie could sense no deception in his voice, only genuine openness. She had prepared many questions about human culture and technology and history, but one detail had caught her attention when she reviewed their fleet registry earlier that day. "Your warships," she began. "They carry strange names that I do not understand, and my translators struggle to provide proper context for them." Cole's expression shifted into something she could not quite read, a mixture of pride and something deeper that her telepathic senses could only brush against. "Which names caught your attention?" he asked. "The Kraken," Valkyrie said, "and the Leviathan and the Hydra and the Fenrir and the Cerberus, and many others that seemed to follow a similar pattern." She pulled up a holographic display from her wrist device and showed him the registry. Dozens of human vessels bearing names that her translator marked as mythological creatures. "The Scythian name our vessels after mathematical constants and stellar phenomena," she explained, "because we believe that precision and cosmic truth should guide our actions among the stars." "A logical approach," Cole agreed. "The Kethra named their ships after great warriors and ancestors," Valkyrie continued, "to honor those who came before and to carry their strength into battle." "Also understandable," Cole said. "But humans name their ships after monsters," Valkyrie said, and she let the confusion show in her voice. "After creatures of myth and legend that never existed. Beasts born from primitive fears and ancient superstitions." She meant no offense, but she truly did not understand, and her confusion was genuine. Why would any species choose to associate their instruments of war with imaginary terrors? She asked. Cole turned to face the viewing window and stared out at the stars for a long moment before answering, and when he spoke his voice carried a weight that surprised her. "The Kraken was a monster from the seas of old Earth," he said. "A beast so vast that sailors believed it could drag entire ships down into the depths. And for centuries, our ancestors told stories about it around fires and in taverns, warning each other about the horrors that lurked beneath the waves." Valkyrie listened but still did not understand. "The Leviathan was similar," Cole continued, "a creature of impossible size and terrible power that represented everything humans feared about the unknown oceans that cover most of our world. But these creatures never existed," Valkyrie pointed out. "They were simply stories." "Yes," Cole agreed. "They were stories, but stories have power, Ambassador. And the monsters we created in our minds were reflections of something real inside us." He turned to face her, and his eyes held an intensity that made her telepathic senses flare with warning. "Humans learned very early in our history that the universe is not kind," he said, "and that there are always predators waiting in the darkness to prey upon the weak." "This is true for all species," Valkyrie said. "But not all species respond the same way," Cole replied. "Because some species build walls and hide behind them. And some species make alliances and hope for protection. And some species simply accept their fate and pray to whatever gods they believe in." "And humans?" Valkyrie asked. Cole smiled, but it was not the warm, diplomatic smile from before, and something in his expression made the ancient predator instincts buried deep in Valkyrie's brain stir with unease. "Humans decided that if the universe was full of monsters," he said, "then we would become the biggest monsters of all, and we would make the darkness itself afraid to touch us." Valkyrie felt a chill run through her body, despite the comfortable temperature of the hall. "We name our ships after the terrors of our past," Cole continued, "because we want our enemies to understand what is coming for them. And we want them to know that the creatures their ancestors feared in the night are nothing compared to what humanity can become when we are protecting our own." Valkyrie wanted to dismiss this as human arrogance, as the boasting of a young species that did not yet understand its place in the galaxy. But something in Cole's voice made her hesitate. "You think us foolish," Cole said, reading her expression. "I think you are dramatic," Valkyrie admitted, "and perhaps overly attached to your mythology." Cole laughed, and the tension broke, and he returned to his diplomatic demeanor as easily as changing clothes. "Perhaps you are right," he said, "or perhaps one day you will see why we chose these names, and on that day, I hope you remember this conversation." Before Valkyrie could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the station, and holographic displays flickered to life showing emergency broadcasts. A distress signal had arrived from the colony world of Thesan 4, a multi-species settlement near the border of Concord space, and the message was terrifying in its simplicity. The Vorath Dominion had broken the peace. Valkyrie felt her blood turn cold, because everyone knew what the Vorath did to worlds they conquered, and everyone knew that the Concord's response fleet was weeks away. She looked at Captain Cole and saw that his expression had changed completely, the diplomatic warmth replaced by something hard and cold and utterly focused. "It seems," he said quietly, "that you may get your answer sooner than expected, Ambassador." And in that moment Valkyrie realized that she had badly underestimated humanity. The sky above Thesan 4 burned orange and red as Vorath. Warships descended through the atmosphere like angry gods come to punish the mortals below. Ambassador Valkyrie crouched in the basement of the diplomatic compound with 30 other representatives from various Concord species, all of them trapped on a world that was dying around them. She had come to Thesan 4 3 days ago for a trade summit, a routine diplomatic mission that should have been boring and uneventful. But now she found herself listening to the screams of civilians and the thunder of orbital bombardment. The Vorath Dominion had been a threat to galactic peace for 3 centuries, a conquering empire that refused to join the Concord and instead chose to expand through violence and subjugation. 47 worlds had fallen to them over the years, and every single one had been stripped of resources and population. The survivors either killed or taken as slaves to work in Vorath mining colonies. The Concord had fought them to a standstill decades ago and established a border that both sides agreed to respect. But that agreement meant nothing now as Vorath soldiers marched through the streets of the colony's capital city. "The response fleet is 18 days away," announced a Kethrai diplomat who was monitoring communications, his armored face grim with despair. 18 days might as well have been 18 years, because the colony would be dead or enslaved long before help could arrive. Valkyrie reached out with her telepathic senses and felt the fear and pain radiating from thousands of minds across the city, a chorus of suffering that made her want to curl into a ball and weep. "We should surrender," suggested a trembling ambassador from one of the smaller species. "Perhaps the Vorath will show mercy if we do not resist." "The Vorath do not know the meaning of mercy," Valkyrie replied, "and surrender will only make our deaths slower and more painful." As if to prove her point, the compound shook as something massive impacted nearby, and dust rained down from the ceiling as cracks spread through the walls. A holographic display showed the Vorath Supreme Commander broadcasting from his flagship in orbit, his reptilian face twisted into an expression of cruel satisfaction. "Citizens of Thyssen 4, the Supreme Commander announced, his voice booming across all frequencies. Your Concord has abandoned you, and your pathetic defenses have crumbled before the might of the Dominion." Valkyrie watched the broadcast with growing horror. "You have 1 hour to surrender unconditionally," the Supreme Commander continued. "And if you do not comply, we will begin systematic purification of all population centers. And your species will serve as an example to any who dare oppose Vorath supremacy." The broadcast ended, and silence fell over the basement, broken only by quiet sobbing from several of the younger diplomats. Valkyrie closed her eyes and tried to prepare herself for death because she had lived a long life and had few regrets. But she mourned for the innocent civilians who would die alongside her. Then something changed. The Kethray diplomat suddenly sat up straight, his eyes wide with disbelief as he stared at his communication device. "A ship has just dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system," he announced, his voice shaking. "Concord reinforcements?" someone asked hopefully. "No," the Kethray replied. "It is a human vessel, a heavy cruiser designated U.E.S. Fenrir, and it appears to be alone." Valkyrie felt her heart sink because a single cruiser against the Vorath Armada was not reinforcement, it was suicide. "They must flee," she said. "One ship cannot make any difference here, and they will only add to the death toll if they stay." But the human ship did not flee. Instead, the Fenrir accelerated directly toward the Vorath fleet, its engines burning bright as it closed the distance with terrifying speed. "What are they doing?" whispered a diplomat beside Valkyrie. The Vorath Supreme Commander apparently wondered the same thing because he broadcast a mocking message to the approaching vessel. "Human ship," he said, laughing. "You are badly outnumbered and hopelessly outgunned, and your bravery borders on stupidity, so turn back now or be destroyed." The response from the Fenrir came seconds later, broadcast on all frequencies so that everyone on Thyssen 4 could hear. "Vorath Fleet," said a calm human voice. "This is Captain Elena Vasquez of the United Earthship Fenrir, and I have a message for your Supreme Commander." The channel crackled with static for a moment. "We are coming for you," Captain Vasquez continued, her voice hard as steel, "and we suggest you run if you can, because the wolf has caught your scent, and wolves do not stop hunting until their prey is dead." Valkyrie stared at the holographic display in disbelief, because no sane commander would threaten an enemy with such overwhelming numerical superiority. The Vorath Supreme Commander laughed again, a cruel sound that echoed across the planet. "Destroy that ship," he ordered his fleet, "and make sure the humans understand what happens to those who oppose the Dominion." A dozen Vorath vessels broke formation and moved to intercept the Fenrir, their weapons charging as they prepared to obliterate the lone human cruiser. Valkyrie wanted to look away because she could not bear to watch another ship die, but something kept her eyes fixed on the display. The Fenrir did not slow down. It did not try to evade. It accelerated even faster, diving straight into the heart of the enemy formation with weapons blazing. "They are insane," the Kethray diplomat whispered. Perhaps they were, Valkyrie thought, but as she watched the tiny human ship charge toward certain death, she remembered what Captain Cole had told her at the diplomatic reception. Humans name their ships after monsters because they want their enemies to understand what is coming for them. And as the first Vorath weapons fire splashed against the Fenrir's shields, Ambassador Valkyrie began to wonder if perhaps the humans were not as foolish as she had believed. The ship took hit after hit, its shields flaring and failing, its hull blackening under the assault, but it kept coming, kept fighting, kept advancing toward the enemy. And somewhere in the back of her mind, Valkyrie heard a wolf begin to howl. The Fenrir fought like nothing Valkyrie had ever seen in her 200 years of life. She watched the tactical display with growing disbelief as the lone UN cruiser tore through the Vorath interceptors with savage fury, its weapons firing in all directions as it twisted and spun through enemy formations. The Vorath outnumbered the humans by more than 50-1, their ships larger and more heavily armed, their crews trained in the brutal doctrine of conquest that had crushed 47 worlds. But the Fenrir did not seem to care about the odds. A Vorath destroyer moved to block the human ship's path, and instead of evading or retreating, Captain Vasquez drove her vessel directly into the enemy. The two ships collided with a flash of light that could be seen from the planet's surface, and Valkyrie gasped in horror as she expected both vessels to be destroyed. But the Fenrir emerged from the other side of the Vorath ship, trailing fire and debris, its hull torn open in a dozen places, but somehow still functioning. The Vorath destroyer fell away in 2 pieces, its crew dead before they could even understand what had happened. "How is that possible?" whispered the Kethray diplomat beside her, his voice filled with awe and terror. Valkyrie had no answer because everything she knew about space combat told her that what she was witnessing should not be happening. The Fenrir should have been destroyed in the first minute of battle. Instead, the human ship continued to fight, its crew refusing to acknowledge the damage that would have crippled any other vessel. Strange music began broadcasting on all frequencies, a thundering rhythm of drums and guitars that Valkyrie's translator struggled to process. And she realized with shock that the humans were playing their war songs for everyone to hear. The music was primal and aggressive, filled with screaming voices and pounding beats that made her ancient instincts stir with recognition. This was the sound of predators on the hunt. The Vorath Supreme Commander watched from his flagship with growing frustration as the lone human ship continued to embarrass his forces. "Concentrate all fire on that vessel," he ordered, his voice no longer mocking but angry and confused. A dozen more ships joined the attack on the Fenrir, their combined weapons creating a storm of destruction that no cruiser should be able to survive. The human ship's remaining shields collapsed under the assault, and Valkyrie watched as armor plates were torn away and entire sections of the hull were exposed to the vacuum of space. But still, the Fenrir kept fighting. Valkyrie reached out with her telepathic senses toward the human ship, wanting to understand what was happening aboard that dying vessel. What she found made her blood run cold. The crew of the Fenrir knew they were going to die. Every single one of them understood that this battle had only one possible ending, and yet she sensed no fear in their minds, no despair, no regret. Instead, she felt rage, pure and terrible, and focused like a blade aimed at the heart of the enemy. She felt determination so strong that it burned like a star in the darkness of space. And underneath it all, she felt love, fierce and protective for the innocent people trapped on the planet below. The humans were not fighting to survive. They were fighting to buy time, to hurt the enemy, to prove that attacking the defenseless came with a price. Captain Vasquez spoke over the ship's communication system, her voice calm despite the chaos around her. "All hands, this is the captain," she said. "We have done well today, and I am proud of every single one of you." The ship shook as another volley of Vorath weapons struck home, and warning lights flashed across every console. "We will not see the end of this battle," Vasquez continued, "but our brothers and sisters are coming, and they will finish what we started." A cheer rose from the human crew, defiant and loud despite their wounds and their dying ship. "For Earth," Vasquez said, "for humanity, and for everyone down on that planet who cannot fight for themselves. For the pack, the crew responded in unison. The Fenrir made one final charge, its engines overloading as Captain Vasquez pushed them far beyond their safe limits. The human ship plowed into a Varith carrier, the largest vessel in the intercepting force, and this time there was no emerging from the other side. Both ships exploded in a massive fireball that consumed 3 nearby Varith frigates as well. And for a moment, the space around Thiessen 4 was lit by a second sun. When the light faded, the Fenrir was gone. But 11 Vorath ships had gone with it, including 2 capital vessels that had been the pride of the Dominion fleet. Valkyrie stared at the empty space where the human cruiser had been, tears streaming down her face for reasons she did not fully understand. The Vorath Supreme Commander was screaming orders at his remaining forces, demanding to know how a single ship had caused so much damage. But before anyone could answer, a final transmission burst from the debris field where the Fenrir had died. It was an automated message, recorded before the battle began and set to broadcast upon the ship's destruction. Captain Vasquez's voice filled the channel one last time. "To whoever receives this message," she said, "the wolf has howled, and the pack is coming." As if summoned by her words, 80 new contacts appeared on the edge of the system, dropping out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. Human ships, every one of them. And at their head, larger than any vessel Valkyrie had ever seen, was a dreadnought bearing the name Leviathan. The Varith Supreme Commander stared at his tactical display in disbelief. Ambassador Valkyrie looked up at the burning sky and laughed through her tears because she finally understood. The Fenrir had not been a rescue mission. It had been a warning, and now the monsters were truly coming. The Leviathan was the largest warship Ambassador Valkyrie had ever seen, a mountain of metal and weapons that dwarfed even the massive Varith flagship. It moved through space with terrible grace, surrounded by its escort of cruisers and destroyers, each one bearing the name of some ancient terror from human mythology. The Hydra flew on the Leviathan's left flank, and the Cerberus guarded its right, and behind them came the Chimera and the Basilisk and the Wendigo and a dozen others. Each ship carried a name designed to inspire fear, and watching them advance toward the Varith fleet, Valkyrie understood that these were not just names. They were promises. The Varith Supreme Commander rallied his remaining forces, nearly 40 ships still operational despite the damage the Fenrir had caused. "All vessels form defensive formation," he ordered, his voice carrying forced confidence that Valkyrie's telepathic senses immediately recognized as false. The Supreme Commander was afraid. For the first time in his long career of conquest and destruction, he faced an enemy that did not flee or beg for mercy. The human fleet stopped at extreme weapons range and held position, and for a long moment, neither side moved. Then a communication channel opened and a new voice filled the silence. "Varith Fleet, this is Admiral Yuki Tanaka of the United Earth Dreadnought Leviathan," the voice announced, calm and cold as deep ocean water. Valkyrie focused on the holographic display and saw the human admiral standing on her bridge. A small woman with silver hair and eyes that seemed to look through the screen and into the souls of those who watched. "You came to this world to make slaves and corpses," Admiral Tanaka continued, "and I am here to tell you that neither will happen today." The Vorath Supreme Commander laughed, though the sound was hollow. "You are still outnumbered, human," he said, "and one ship's sacrifice changes nothing about the mathematics of this battle." "Mathematics," Admiral Tanaka repeated, and something in her voice made Valkyrie shiver. "Let me explain something about human mathematics," the Admiral said, "because our calculations work differently than yours." She gestured and tactical data appeared on the shared channel, showing the relative positions of both fleets. "You have 40 ships," she said, "and I have 18, which means you believe you have the advantage." "We do have the advantage," the Supreme Commander insisted. "No, Admiral Tanaka replied. You have targets, and every ship you see before you carries crews who watch the Fenrir die. Her voice hardened into something terrible. Every human in this fleet lost friends today, she continued. Brothers and sisters who gave their lives to protect strangers they had never met. And now we are going to make you pay for every single one of them. The Leviathan's weapon systems powered up with a sound that resonated across the communication channel, a deep thrumming that seemed to vibrate in Valkyri's bones. Your ships will become debris, Admiral Tanaka said. Your names will be forgotten, and your dominion will learn what your ancestors knew when they huddled in caves and feared the darkness. And what is that? The Supreme Commander demanded. Admiral Tanaka smiled, and it was the smile of something ancient and hungry rising from depths beyond imagination. That there are things in the dark more terrible than you, she answered. The human fleet attacked. What followed was not a battle, but a massacre. The Leviathan fired weapons that Valkyrie had never seen before, beams of twisted gravity that tore Vorath ships apart at the molecular level. Plasma swarms erupted from the human cruisers, thousands of burning projectiles that overwhelmed Vorath point defense systems and turned hulls into slag. And then came the weapons the humans called Hellfire torpedoes, missiles that seemed to burn with actual flames in the vacuum of space, each one carrying enough destructive power to crack a moon. The Vorath fought back with everything they had, and they did manage to hurt the humans. Valkyrie watched the Basilisk take a direct hit that left it limping and burning. She saw the Wendigo lose half its crew to a lucky shot that breached its reactor containment. But the human ships did not stop fighting. The Basilisk continued to fire with its remaining weapons, its surviving crew working to repair damage while still engaging the enemy. The Wendigo vented its compromised reactor section into space and kept advancing on emergency power. And the Leviathan moved through the heart of the Vorath fleet like a predator among prey, destroying everything it touched. The Vorath Supreme Commander ordered his ships to concentrate fire on the human dreadnought, and dozens of weapons converged on the Leviathan at once. The great ship's shields flared and failed under the assault, and armor plates were torn away. And for a moment, Valkyrie thought the humans had finally met something they could not overcome. But then the Leviathan's secondary weapons came online, and the dreadnought began to spin, rotating on its axis while firing in all directions. It became a whirlwind of destruction, a storm of death that consumed everything around it. Ships that had been firing moments before now tried to flee, but the Leviathan pursued them, relentless and unstoppable. The Vorath Supreme Commander watched his fleet die, and finally understood what kind of enemy he had provoked. All ships retreat, he ordered. Fall back to the jump point. But it was too late. The human cruisers had anticipated this move, positioning themselves to cut off the Vorath escape route. The Supreme Commander's flagship tried to break through the blockade, its massive engines pushing it towards safety. Admiral Tanaka's voice came over the channel one final time. You wanted to make this world an example, she said, and so it will be, but not the example you intended. Today, Thesan IV will become the place where the galaxy learned what happens when you threaten the innocent. The Leviathan turned its full attention to the fleeing flagship. Today, the Vorath Dominion will learn why humans named their ships after monsters, Admiral Tanaka said. And today, you will meet one. The dreadnought's main weapon charged, a sound like a god drawing breath before speaking a word of destruction. The Supreme Commander had time for one final scream before the Leviathan erased his ship from existence. And when the battle ended, not a single Vorath vessel remained intact. The monsters had come, and they had done what monsters do. They had devoured those who threatened their pack. The sun rose over the ruins of Thesan, the Fourth's capital city, casting golden light across streets that still smoked from orbital bombardment. Ambassador Valkyrie walked through the wreckage in a daze. unable to fully process everything that had happened in the last 12 hours. The Vorath Dominion's fleet was gone, reduced to scattered debris that would orbit the planet for centuries as a reminder of what had happened here. And the humans who had destroyed them now walked among the survivors with gentle hands and soft voices, so different from the monsters Valkyrie had witnessed during the battle. She watched a human marine kneel beside a wounded Scythian child, carefully bandaging injuries while humming a soft melody that seemed to calm the frightened youngling. Another human carried an elderly Kethrai on his back, helping the injured diplomat reach a medical station that the humans had established within hours of the battle's end. Supply ships had arrived with the fleet, loaded with food and medicine and emergency shelters, and the humans distributed these supplies to anyone who needed them without asking for anything in return. These were the same people who had fought like demons in the darkness of space, who had screamed war songs while ramming their ships into enemy vessels, who had shown no mercy to the Vorath invaders. How could such gentle souls become such terrible warriors? Valkyrie needed to understand. She found Admiral Tanaka standing alone on a hill overlooking the city, her silver hair blowing in the morning breeze as she stared at a small tablet in her hands. The Admiral's face was drawn and tired, and Valkyrie could sense deep sadness radiating from her mind. "Admiral Tanaka," Valkyrie said softly, not wanting to intrude. The human looked up and offered a small smile that did not reach her eyes. "Ambassador Valkyrie," she replied, "I am glad to see you survived." "Thanks to your people," Valkyrie said. "If the Fenrir had not arrived when it did, we would all be dead or worse." Admiral Tanaka looked back at her tablet, and Valkyrie saw that it displayed a list of names. Human names, hundreds of them. "The crew of the Fenrir," Tanaka explained, "and the others we lost today. Brave men and women who will never go home to their families." She touched the screen gently, as if caressing the faces of fallen friends. "This is the price we pay," she said quietly. Valkyrie stood beside the Admiral in silence for a long moment, watching the humans below as they worked to help the survivors. "I asked Captain Cole once why humans name their ships after monsters," Valkyrie finally said. Tanaka nodded slowly. "And now you have seen the answer," she replied. "I thought I understood," Valkyrie admitted. "I thought it was about intimidation, about making your enemies fear you before the battle even begins." "That is part of it," Tanaka agreed. "But there is more," Valkyrie continued. "Something deeper that I am only beginning to grasp." The Admiral turned to face her, and Valkyrie was struck by how small this woman seemed compared to the legend she had witnessed on the bridge of the Leviathan. Humans learned very early in our history that the universe contains real monsters, Tanaka said. "Creatures and forces that prey upon the weak and destroy the innocent." She gestured toward the ruined city below. "The Vorath were such monsters," she continued. "Predators who believed that strength gave them the right to take whatever they wanted, regardless of the suffering they caused." "Many species would agree with that philosophy," Valkyrie said carefully. "And many species have been crushed by it," Tanaka replied. "But humanity made a different choice." She looked up at the morning sky, where the wreckage of the Vorath fleet was visible as glittering streaks among the stars. "We decided that if the universe was determined to create monsters," she said, "then we would become the biggest monsters of all, but we would choose what kind of monsters we would be." Valkyrie felt something shift in her understanding. "The creatures we name our ships after were terrors of our ancient past," Tanaka explained. "The Kraken dragged sailors to their deaths. The Leviathan swallowed ships whole. The Fenrir was destined to devour a god." "But those were stories of destruction and chaos," Valkyrie said. "Yes," Tanaka agreed. "And we claim those names to remind ourselves of what we are capable of becoming." She turned back to face the ambassador, and her eyes held a weight of centuries. "When we name a ship Fenrir or Leviathan or Hydra, we are not celebrating those creatures," she said. We are acknowledging the monster that lives inside every human, the capacity for terrible violence that is part of our nature. And then? Valkyrie asked. And then we choose to point that monster at those who threaten the innocent, Tanaka said. We become the nightmare that other nightmares fear, the predator that hunts predators, the beast that rises from the deep to devour those who would harm our pack. She smiled, and this time there was warmth in it. We become monsters so that others do not have to, she said. We carry that burden so that children can sleep peacefully and families can live without fear. Valkyrie looked down at the human Marines helping the wounded below, and she finally understood. Monsters who protect, she whispered. Always, Tanaka confirmed. That is what separates us from the Varath and their kind. They became monsters because they enjoyed the power it gave them, the Admiral continued. But we become monsters because someone has to stand between the darkness and those who cannot fight for themselves. We would rather carry that weight ourselves than let the innocent suffer. Valkyrie felt tears forming in her eyes as the truth settled into her heart. These humans were not the primitive species she had dismissed at the diplomatic reception. They were guardians who had looked into the abyss of their own nature and chosen to use their darkest capabilities in service of the light. I was wrong about your people, Valkyrie said. Many are, Tanaka replied without judgment, and we prefer it that way, because it means fewer conflicts and fewer deaths. But when someone threatens those we have sworn to protect, she added, her voice hardening, we want them to know exactly what is coming for them. She looked at the list of names on her tablet one final time before putting it away. The crew of the Fenrir knew they were going to die, she said, but they attacked anyway, because they believed that protecting strangers was worth their lives. That is the human way, she continued. We fight for each other, we die for each other, and we remember those who fall so that their sacrifice is never forgotten. Months later, when Ambassador Valkyrie returned to the Galactic Concord Assembly, new species would ask her about humanity. They would point to the Human Fleet Registry and ask why these strange creatures named their ships after monsters. And Valkyrie would smile and tell them the truth. Because when humanity calls something a monster, she would say, they mean it as a promise. Hurt the defenseless, and you will meet one. And the elder races of the galaxy would nod in understanding, because they had learned what the Varath learned too late. There were things in the darkness more terrible than any predator, more relentless than any conqueror, more unstoppable than any force of nature. There were humans, and they had chosen to be monsters so that the rest of the galaxy could live in peace.